Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel.
Hey everyone, welcome. It's good to be back. Welcome to Coffee with Foul Play, and the title of our presentation today is called Hoodwinked. And my name is Dr. Silkman, and welcome, beautiful people. Thank you for coming onto the podcast and listening to what we do. Before we start, I just hope that everyone is doing okay in the face of this pandemic. Hope that you guys are all safe and your family and your loved ones are all safe and everyone's got enough toilet paper. I managed to find 4 rolls of toilet paper, which is awesome. Not bad after a month. And let's hope that you've been watching some good quality Netflix and shows that are out there on the internet. I've been watching The Tiger King and How to Fix a Drug Scandal. And just completely mind blowing. All right, guys. Well, our regular researchers for today on the podcast are BB, Jack61, Kelly, Neverly, and One Strand. And monitoring the chat, fielding and getting your questions are both Katnit, Sammy, and Zoe. And our guest researcher for today is Colombo. And guys, if you like what we do, please subscribe to our channel. If you like our podcasts and our work, please give a thumbs up. And it would be great if you could subscribe. And all of us from Foul Play want to thank every one of our listeners for coming on board, asking questions, and we try and answer them during the podcast, if not after. And of course, with Foul Play, we've got a really good social media presence. And we have a new website, which has been put together by a lot of people who have worked very hard. And the website contains a lot of the work that Foul Play has done. And we have a very much a team approach. And so various people do various little projects. We've got the PPPs, the TTTs. We've got a lot of the phone calls from Stephen Avery to his family. And of course, we've got the YouTube videos and Coffee with Foul Play as well. And at the moment, what we're doing, guys, is we're on episode number 6, if you're following MAM 2. And so, guys, what we'll do, we'll make a start and we'll have a look at slide number 1. So, as you know, Kathleen Zellner, who's now representing Stephen Avery, she filed a motion for post-conviction scientific testing. And so what she wanted to do is to get her hands on the forensic evidence so it can be professionally tested and examined. And on December the 8th, 2016, which is about 3.5 months after she put in her filing, both her and her DNA expert, Dr. Reich, they went and picked up 9 pieces of evidence. Now, we're talking really, if you look at the CASO document and the testimony, there's literally hundreds of pieces of forensic evidence. The state had agreed to release 9 pieces of evidence for Kathleen Zellner's experts to examine. So if we have a look at slide number 2, and basically this is a summary of the pieces of evidence that were going to be released by the state to Dr. Wright and Kathleen Zellner. And as you can see, predominantly the majority of the evidence that the state was going to release to Kathleen Zellner was basically blood stains and blood flakes from the Toyota RAV4. But notice, there are 2 very important pieces of forensic evidence. Item ID, which is the swab from the hood latch, and item C, which is the Toyota RAV4 key. Both item ID and item C are very important pieces of forensic evidence that were used against Stephen Avery during his trial. They're very, very controversial, and it's awesome that Kathleen Zellner was able to get her hands on these two particular items. So, guys, let's turn to slide number 3. So, both Kathleen Zellner and Dr. Reich, they go to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, and they meet up, of course, with Cherie Culhane. Now, Cherie Culhane, she was the DNA technical unit leader, especially during the time of the trial, and she did the majority of the swabbing that was involved in this particular case. So she did the swabbing, the majority of the swabbing. She did the DNA preparations, and she obtained the PCR results. So what happened is that Kathleen Zellner remained outside, and it was Dr. Wright that met with Cherie Culhane. Now, notice only 8 items of evidence were released by the crime lab. Now, when a piece of forensic evidence is placed in a plastic bag, normally it contains evidence tape, it contains the person's signature and a date. Every time a piece of forensic evidence is removed from an evidence bag, it's resealed with evidence tape and signed and dated. So therefore, one knows how many times someone has had access to forensic evidence. And quite clearly, you can see here on the bottom right-hand side that pieces of forensic evidence were being examined and taken out and placed back all of the time. So if we have a look at slide number 4, and this is item C, the Toyota RAV4 key. And it was examined under high-powered microscope, and you can see that on the top right-hand side. And there was a little bit of debris. Now, it wasn't known what that debris was, but clearly this is something that was not done by the state. This was done by one of Zellner's experts, to have a look whether they could see blood or other type of debris that was present on the key. So if we have a look at slide number 5, so Cherie Culhane, when she obtained the Toyota RAV4 key, now remember, this is the key that was found in Stephen Avery's bedroom. I believe it was on November the 8th, and there was Lenk and Colburn, and Kacharski was sitting on the bed observing what they were doing, and all of a sudden the key was found on the floor. Well, when the key was handed over to Cherie Culhane, she swabbed, actually before she swabbed the key, she had a look at the key and examined it before doing any swabbing. And what she stated in the trial was that she did not find any evidence of staining. So she had a look at the key, didn't see any blood or anything else on the key. Now remember, the state is attesting that Stephen Avery was actively bleeding when he assaulted and murdered Teresa Halbach. His right middle finger was apparently actively bleeding, and that's what caused the blood to be left in the Toyota RAV4. Well, as we know, guys, blood was left near the ignition switch, which means that if Stephen Avery was using the key, this particular key, item C, to put into the ignition and leave blood near the ignition switch, it's hard to believe that Stephen Avery would not leave any of his blood actually on the key itself. So the important thing here, guys, is that Cherie Culhane did not notice any presence of blood on the key. Now, Cherie Culhane took a swab of the black portion of the key, and she was able to isolate DNA from the swab. And lo and behold, when she did a PCR, the test came back as a full, robust genomic profile belonging to Stephen Avery. It was a 100% match. However, on further questioning of Cherie Cohen, what she did was that she actually used the entire swab for the DNA extraction, which means that no one can go back and re-examine or retest the swab. She used the entire swab for her DNA preparation. And that's very unusual because the laboratory protocol states that you never use the entire sample, you subdivide it up just in case you need to do it again. So she used the entire swab. But what was very, very obvious was that she only detected Stephen Avery's genomic DNA profile on the key. There was no one else's DNA on that key. And of course, if this key allegedly belonged to Teresa Hallbach and she had used this key for several years, one would have expected at least to have found her genomic profile on the key. However, there was no mixture of DNA on that key. The only DNA that was present on the key belonged to Stephen Avery. So that was very, very suspicious for a start. If we have a look at slide number 6, now what Cherie Cohen did was that she extracted DNA from the swab and she was able to determine a concentration of the DNA that she obtained from the key swab. Now, Jerome Buting had asked Cherie Cohen, okay, how much DNA did you get from swabbing of the key? And the concentration was 0.17 nanogram per microliter. And a nanogram is a billionth of a gram. It's a very small amount. Now, she normally extracts her DNA in a volume between 30 to 35 microliters. So she wasn't 100% sure what the value was. So the total amount extracted from the key was between 5.1 and nearly 6 nanograms. Okay, now some of you guys are probably thinking, well, exactly what does that mean? Is it high? Is it low? Is it significant? Is it normal? Well, here's the problem. And that is the defense did not have a DNA expert on the panel to discuss the significance of what these values actually meant. So that was a big, big issue. However, Kathleen Zellner employed a DNA expert to have a look at these values to make sense of what they actually meant. So if we have a look at slide number 7, Cherie Cohen tried to explain the DNA levels that were found on various items by saying that some individuals are either high secretors or low secretors, and she meant what's called shedder status. In other words, some people shed more skin cells than others, and hence they leave more DNA or less DNA. Now, Dr. Carl Wright, he's a forensic DNA expert, and he basically said that the DNA shedder status, known as secretors, has got no merit in science. And he says, and I quote, "It was junk and we can ignore it." So, what Kathleen Zellner did, probably with consultation of Dr. Wright, is that Kathleen Zellner found a duplicate RAV4 key, very much like item C. And she brought it to prison and got Stephen Avery to hold the key for 12 minutes while he was in prison. She recovered the key, and Dr. Reich's assistant extracted the DNA from the key. So in other words, it's like touch DNA. You touch an object, how much DNA do you leave on that key? So this was an excellent way to say, okay, was it the same amount of DNA that Cherie Cohen found? Was it more? Was it less? What type of DNA amount was actually recovered? So Stephen Avery held the key for 12 minutes. Now, what is interesting is how did they come up with this 12 minutes? I think they probably did a simulation test of obtaining the key, putting it into the ignition, and taking the key from where they allegedly dumped the car at the pit, and then taking it back to his property. So remember, we're dealing with touch DNA. So if we have a look at slide number 8, well, the DNA analyst also obtained a DNA value concentration in nanograms per microliter. Now, Cherie Culhane obtained a value of 0.17 nanograms per microliter. Well, when the DNA expert from Dr. Reich's lab extracted the DNA from the key from a swab, they only obtained 0.017 nanograms per microliter. So, in other words, they were able to extract way less DNA than what the state did. And that was very interesting. Now, remember, we've got to take into account various factors, the different circumstances, different conditions. But one would have expected a 2 to 3-fold difference, right? Just due to the circumstances. However, this was very significant because the state was able to extract tenfold more than what the DNA expert was able to extract. So that's a huge difference or huge disparity in DNA levels. Now, what Ken Kratz did, if we have a look at slide number 9, Ken Kratz, during the trial, he was arguing with the defense. And what the defense were postulating was, well, since the key was found in Stephen Avery's trailer, either Lenk or Colburn or another party simply got Stephen Avery's toothbrush, and you can see that on the right-hand side, and rubbed it on the key. So to deposit some cells from Stephen Avery, from the toothbrush, onto the key. And that would explain why the key contains DNA and at relatively high levels, right? And it's interesting that Cherie Culhane said at the trial that, hey, look, trying to extract DNA from from a toothbrush is not really a very good source of DNA. And she also stated during the trial that it's very difficult to get a DNA profile from a toothbrush. Well, lo and behold, our researchers have been isolating DNA, genomic DNA from toothbrush for a very long period of time. And in actual fact, in various crimes, they used the toothbrush for identity of victims. They extract genomic DNA. And what scientists have been able to do is extract between 10 to 430 nanograms of DNA from a toothbrush. That's a huge variation. But even though there was toothpaste present, it didn't affect the quality of the DNA. So in other words, the scientists were able to get a full genomic DNA profile from a toothbrush. So hence, you can't rule out the fact that a toothbrush was indeed scrubbed across the key. And that would explain why the state was able to get a tenfold higher amount of DNA on that key. So toothbrushes are a very good source of genomic DNA. And guys, this shows the weakness of the defense. They didn't have a DNA expert to refute what Ken Kratz was saying in court. We have a look at slide number 10. Dr. Carl Wright was asked about a toothbrush and a buccal swab. And guys, a buccal swab, you get it from the inside of your cheek, and it will contain epithelial cells, right? And Dr. Reich said that both a toothbrush and a buccal swab are excellent sources of DNA. So, in other words, if you rub the toothbrush or rub the buccal swab on the key, that will deposit plenty of DNA on. There's another item. If you've spotted it on the page on the top right hand corner, and that is there's a razor blade, a shaver. And as you know, when you shave, you're scraping your outer layer of skin. So if a swab was taken of the razor, that would also be an excellent source of DNA as well. So, guys, if we have a look at slide number 11, here's the big dilemma. And Kathleen Zellner stated, and I quote, "There are never mixtures on any of these items. And if you look at the forensic evidence, it's really puzzling." Now, if you look at the back of the Toyota RAV4, you find Teresa Halbach's blood. You don't find any from Stephen Avery, despite the fact that the state said he was actively bleeding. You don't find Stephen Avery's and Teresa Halbach's DNA mixed anywhere. If you look at the hood latch, only Steve, and we'll be discussing this. If you look at the hood latch, only Stephen Avery's DNA was found on the hood latch. Now, one would imagine that Teresa or somebody else would have also touched the hood latch during the lifetime of the Toyota RAV4. Yet, mysteriously, only Stephen Avery's DNA pops up on the hood latch. If we have a look at the key, again, only Stephen Avery's DNA is found on the key, despite the fact that the key is owned or was owned by Teresa Halbach. So here's a big problem. There are no mixtures of DNA in any of those forensic samples. So if we have a look at slide number 12, eventually, and we'll discuss this, eventually the hood latch was swabbed. It wasn't immediately swabbed by Cherie Culhane, it was swabbed much later. So a swab was taken of the hood latch, known as item ID. Now remember, Kathleen Zellner was able to get the hood latch swab for further analysis. Cherie Culhane extracted DNA from the hood latch swab, and it gave a 100% match to Stephen Avery, a full, robust genomic profile belonging to Stephen Avery. So, if we have a look at slide 13, the DNA expert and Kathleen Zellner asked a very important question. Okay, what is the source for the hood latch DNA? Where did it come from? So, what the expert did was that they took the hood latch and they did an extract, a liquid extract from the hood latch swab. Now, before doing that, they observed the hood latch. They checked to see whether there was any discoloration, anything like that visually by looking at the hood latch swab. So they did an extract and they tested it for saliva, blood, urine, and semen. It was negative for all of them. So it couldn't have been from a buccal swab. The DNA couldn't have come from a buccal swab because it would have had saliva. It couldn't have come from blood, otherwise it would have come up positive for blood. And you can obviously ignore the urine and the semen. So now you've got an issue. Where did this hood latch DNA actually come from? If it's not from saliva or from blood. And I don't believe that Cherie Culhane had noted any discoloration or presence of blood on the hood latch swab that was taken. So if we have a look at slide number 14, the hood latch swab itself was given to another expert of Zellner, Dr. Chris Palahniuk from Microtrace. Now what he did, he also went to an exemplar Toyota RAV4, a 2012 model, and he took a swab of the hood latch. He also did it on another vehicle as well to see what type of discoloration, if any, would be on that hood latch swab. And if we have a look at slide number 15. So what Dr. Chris Palahniuk noted was when he took a swab of the exemplar Toyota RAV4, it gave, and now this is just looking at it visually, it gave a heavy dark streak of debris. So, like a black stain on the actual swab. It'll be interesting, guys, if you take a swab and try it on your own car, right? Go to the hood latch, test it out, see what type of discoloration you get. Is it clean or is it discolored? And normally, an engine compartment is fairly greasy, fairly dirty. Even though you try your best to keep it clean, you're going to see dust and everything else. So when Dr. Palanek did exemplar hood latch swabs, they were dark, right? They had a dark debris on it. However, when he had a look at the hood latch swab that Kathleen Zellner and Dr. Reich picked up from the crime lab, it was relatively clean. So by looking at the hood latch swab, he could not see any debris with the unaided eye. However, Dr. Palanek said in his affidavit, when he was able to place the hood latch swab under a microscope, he saw fine mineral grains and other particles of airborne dust, for example, pollen. So there was something on that hood latch swab, right? So, but by looking at with the naked eye, unaided eye, he couldn't see anything, no discoloration. So that was a big difference between those two hood latch swabs. So guys, if we have a look at slide number 16, you can see that's the original hood latch swab that was obtained from the crime laboratory. And you can see that the cotton from the hood latch is relatively clean. It's not dark and discolored. Now, if we have a look at slide 17, you can see that there's something really bizarre going on with the hood latch swab. So we've covered this in a previous podcast. Now, when Kathleen Zellner got a DNA expert to do a trial run by having three people, different people, touch a hood latch and then being swabbed, the hood latch swabbed and clean after each experiment, they found that only 4 samples out of 15 even gave any DNA at all. Whereas when the Cherie Cohen had extracted the DNA from the hood latch swab, well, she was able to obtain, now this is total amount of DNA here, she was able to obtain 1.848 nanograms. Now you compare that to the other individuals who also touched the hood latch as well, and DNA was extracted. On average, it was nearly 26-fold higher. So there was something wrong here. It didn't appear normal. Why should Stephen Avery leave on the hood latch nearly 26 times more than the people that were sampled in air when they did the test touching of the hood latch? Something didn't appear right. And a comment was made that it appeared that the evidence, that is the hood latch swab, was either improved or manipulated in some fashion. So it made Kathleen Zellner and her experts are very suspicious. So guys, let's have a look at slide 18. And the question is, how can forensic evidence be improved or manipulated? Now, remember, Dr. Reich, he had a look at the hood latch swab, and he said that it was very lightly discovered. And this was in his affidavit that he wrote for Kathleen Zellner. So there was a bit of discoloration, but very, very light. And yet you can see that it contained a huge amount of DNA on that hood latch swab. So he said that the easiest way to improve or manipulate a result is all you do is you relabel an existing item. You don't have to plant anything. You just simply change or swap a label on a swab and away you go. Let's have a look at slide number 19. So what Dr. Reich said, of course, what you need is a standard, right? You need a swab, for example, a swab, and from that swab, it's got to be from the suspect. So you know that that swab belongs to a certain individual. So you have that as a key swab. That's the standard from that individual. We have a look at slide number 20. Then when someone goes to a crime scene and there's blood or other fluids or other things, normally the crime scene, people use swabs, right? So they're called evidence samples. The majority of the evidence samples are indeed swabs themselves. So if we have a look at slide 21, what Dr. Reich said is that you don't place the reference swab into the proper envelope, and all you do is you change the name of the swab. That means that the person changing the name of the swab is the only person who would know that that particular sample is not the reference sample, right? That's very, very easy to do. And if we have a look at slide number 22, we can see that when Stephen Avery was arrested on November the 9th, 2005, he was taken, I think, to a hospital and they did various photographs, but they also did swabs. And one of the nurses took 2 swabs in Stephen's groin area. So if we have a look at slide 23, why is that significant? Well, Fassbender and Uyghur, who were the chief investigators, they had a search warrant, but not for taking groin swabs. So somehow they overlooked the fact that it wasn't for taking groin swabs. So Uyghur, investigator Uyghur, told the nurse to dispose of the 2 groin swabs in a biohazard sharps bin, because legally they weren't permitted to take those groin swabs. But here's the speculation part, guys. Now remember, this is speculation. And that is, did Uyghur actually retrieve the groin swabs from the biohazard sharps bin? Did he actually keep them? So guys, let's have a look at slide 24. We're nearly finished here. We know that Stephen Avery was arrested on November the 9th. And groin swabs were taken. 2 groin swabs were taken. Allegedly, they were thrown out. Now, we know that on April the 3rd, the hood latch was swabbed. And on the 4th of April, the swab was delivered to the crime lab. Now, how did this all come about? Well, this all came about, guys, because remember, Brendan Dassey was questioned by Fassbender on the 1st of March 2006. And Fassbender kept on questioning Brendan about, well, did Stephen go under the hood? Did he check the motor? Did he do this and did he do that? So it was Fassbender that was mentioning about Stephen Avery going underneath the hood of the car. Fassbender knew that the battery had been disconnected in the Toyota RAV4. So eventually Brendan agreed, yeah, he was under the hood. I don't know what he did. And in actual fact, Brendan even suggested that's where Stephen Avery had cut his finger, right, while being under the hood. Well, if he, of course, cut his finger while being under the hood, he would have, of course, left blood everywhere. No blood was seen under the hood, right? And so it was from Brendan eventually agreeing with Fassbender that Stephen Avery had poked his head under the hood. That's why they eventually went to the Toyota RAV4 and they re-swabbed it. So if you go to page 25. Now notice, when they originally got the Toyota RAV4 in the crime lab, they obviously never opened up the hood and swabbed the hood latch, the battery terminals, various other parts of the vehicle. They never did that. But on April the 3rd, they returned. They went to the Toyota RAV4 that was in storage, and it was Sergeant Tyson that did the DNA swabs. And it was Hawkins who did the photography of the hood latch and other parts of the vehicle. So if we have a look at page number 26, we can see that we have a ledger form, and both Tyson and Hawkins appear on the ledger form, exactly as was in CASO. So all that makes perfect sense. If we now turn to page 27, we can see that it was Mark Wiegert that was meant to transport the hood latch swabs to the crime lab. But if we turn now to page 28, what you find is it's not Mark Wiegert. Well, Mark Wiegert may have brought the hood latch swabs to the crime lab, but he places Jeremy Hawkins' name on the sheet, right? So instead of placing his name, he puts Hawkins' names on the sheet of the swabs, apparently from the hood latch. Now, guys, remember, this is our last slide. This is pure speculation, of course, right? I've got no proof of this. But could Mark Wiegert have substituted the hood latch swab that was taken on April the 3rd, 2006, with one of the groin swabs that was taken on November the 9th, 2005, when Stephen Avery was arrested? So when Cherie Cohen extracts the DNA from that so-called hood latch swab, she's going to find Stephen Avery's DNA profile on there because the hood latch swab has been substituted. No one's going to know that. Cherie Cohen will just test the swab that she's been given. So this has some merit because it would explain why the hood latch swab itself appeared relatively clean, not perfectly clean, but much cleaner than an exemplar hood latch swab compared to other vehicles. It would explain why there was a huge amount of DNA present on that hood latch swab, about nearly 26-fold higher than other individuals doing exactly the same thing, touching the hood latch, right? But most importantly is this: it would explain the absence of body fluid on the swab. So somehow, remember, if you take a groin swab, essentially what you're doing is you're taking up skin cells. So the hood latch, if the hood latch contains skin cells, that would explain why you're not going to see saliva, blood, right? And that's exactly what Cohen didn't see, discoloration of blood on that hood latch swab. So we end the podcast or this presentation with, was Stephen Avery actually hoodwinked? Now, I know that both the key and the hood latch are extremely controversial pieces of evidence. Okay, guys, let's open up the panel and tell us what you think, guys. Let's get some questions going. Who's got a question? Colombo.
I can't see any evidence that actually shows that the RAV4 was processed, other than the fact that they say things are on the RAV4 that they can't explain whose is, where it came from, how it got there, or what it is. The only thing that they do describe puts Stephen there and nobody else.
Correct. Thank you, Colombo. Look, there's no question. One of the biggest issue I personally find is a lack of in situ photographs of the Toyota RAV4. And so one is, you have to take it on face value when those photographs were taken of the bloodstains within the Toyota RAV4. And somehow you need to explain why Cherie Cohen had used the entire swab from the key. So it means that no one can now forensically test that key swab again. Guys, any other questions? Sammy.
Yep, Miss Piggy has asked, has anyone found out if Cohen ever submitted a deviation report after the Avery case, or was that her only time?
Well, this is really the only case that I've studied that Cherie Culhane has been involved in, apart from Stephen Avery's original 1985 case. I believe that's the only time she used the deviation request form for item FL, the bullet fragment. At no other time did she use a deviation request form, as far as I'm aware.
All right. One more question. Mazda is asking, do you think Culhane was bullied into compliance or willing participant to the frame up?
Personally, no question about it. It really depends on what her level of involvement actually was, whether she was put in a compromising position to change results, improve results, give the desired outcome. And we know that's the case because remember, it was Fassbender who phoned her very early on in the investigation. And she even wrote down, I don't think she was meant to have written it down.
I think she did that as like a get out of jail free card for herself to cover her butt.
Correct, because that directly implicated one of the lead investigators, Fassbender, who said, try to put her in his garage or house. Now, that's very, very suspicious.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sammy. Neville, do you have a question?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, in regards to Culhane being bullied into doing all of this, or did she volunteer? She volunteered, which is against the rules, basically. You're not supposed to volunteer for any case. You're just supposed to take them as they come,
Yes.
especially
Yes.
with that conflict of interest, the little one that we have, that she was the person who put Stephen in jail in 85 and also the
Yes.
same person who exonerated him.
Correct.
And also with
Correct.
Fassbender telling her to put Teresa either in his house or in the garage. That's so against the practice.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, it is.
They're
Yes, it
supposed
is.
to just analyze the sample and tell what it is, and then that would take the investigation into that direction, not the other way around.
Correct. Thank you, Neville. And the amazing thing is that Ken Kratz, during the trial, sang the praises of Cherie Culhane and said that Cherie Culhane took a lead role. She nominated herself to be involved in the case, to do all the swabbing, to do all the results. Now, remember, she was in a very compromising position because she's the one that got Stephen Avery exonerated in the first case in 2003 because she's done the forensic evidence on the pubic hair, right? And so she probably felt a lot of pressure and under obligation because Stephen Avery had a $36 million lawsuit against the county. Jack 61, do you have a comment or a question?
Well, my first one is, and we've hammered on this a lot, and not only here, but I've heard many others talk about it. This time frame between November 5th and April 3rd, I think they swabbed the hood latch. Is that right?
Yes, April the 3rd.
So we're looking at 5 months, basically 149, 150 days of this touch DNA in vast amounts surviving that long without really degrading at all. Actually seems to have multiplied. Has there been
Yes.
any newer studies that you are aware of that support this evidence that this could survive that long of a period of time? To me, it's just ludicrous.
Well, thank you, Jack. Yes, we actually covered this in a previous podcast, and there has been research done on touch DNA. And what happens is that it does take several days, but it rapidly degrades. So what happens is, I think we worked out that it was nearly 150 days since allegedly Stephen Avery had touched the hood latch, right? When you're dealing with October the 31st and when it was swabbed, which means, guys, that instead of being a 26-fold higher, you're probably looking at more like 60 fold higher if you take into account the rate of degradation. So that means that the amount of DNA left on that hood latch is probably 60 times higher than those 3 individual samples that were done as a test. Because you're correct, scientists have shown that the DNA that's left as touch degrades because you've got DNA on metal, which means you've got exposure to bacteria, to fungi, to moisture, and that leads to degradation of DNA. So if you factor that into account, that means that Stephen Avery left probably 60-fold higher than the 3 other participants. That's huge. Thank you, Jack61. Colombo.
Yeah, when Calhoun used up all of the sample from item FL, she had to write the deviation report and get that paper.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, when she did the key, she used up all of the samples so that it could not be retested. Why
That's
isn't
correct.
there a deviation report for the key?
Well, basically, I know you're not going to believe this, but she fundamentally broke one of her own laboratory protocol, and that is that she used up all the DNA. And you're correct. She really needed to put a deviation request form to say, oops, I used up all the DNA, and it means that no one else can retest it. I think she basically hid the fact that she used up all of the DNA until I think it was Beauty that finally got it out of her because it can't be retested. So if it can't be retested, who actually believes the result? She could have made it up, right?
Not I.
Yeah, if you can't retest that swab, it could have easily been made up and no one's going to know. Neverly.
Yeah, exactly. And Kathleen Zellner keeps saying the same thing, that there is a reoccurring theme and that it's very suspicious that everything that the state said they did, like with testing and whatnot, she
Yes.
couldn't replicate. And she said it should have been really an easy job. If she says this is how it
Correct.
happens, they test
Correct.
it and they come up with the same result. But none of that was happening. And also in regards to the hood latch, she said that the swab never touched the hood latch. Never the swab was never in the vicinity of the RAV because
Yes.
Uyghur just renamed the swab, the groin swab.
Yes. It is controversial, but it is a possibility. But remember, guys, it is speculation. One Strand, do you have a comment?
I have a couple of, well, it's probably a 3-part question. First of all, are lab technicians licensed? Secondly, are they required to do continuing education as are other medical professionals? And thirdly, are their procedures evidence-based, updated as far as best practices, or are they not governed by the same as other medical fields?
If you work in a forensics laboratory, you have to be of the highest standard and you need to be up to date. And Cherie Cohen was questioned about this, and she said that she had attended various courses, etc., and so the impression was that she was up to date with the techniques. And of course, you have to be licensed, right? If you're working in a forensic laboratory, you're meant to be under very stringent conditions, right? You have to follow protocols. You have to follow standard operating procedures. There is a laboratory manual. I've gone through it, the Wisconsin State Crime Lab one. I've read it. So there are very strict protocols that have to be followed. They've got forms that they need to fill out. They need to write down everything that they do. So it's all documented, right? But, she also had the highest contamination rate in the lab, right? And so that makes one very suspicious that, she may not have been the best worker in the lab. And there was also a rumor going around that when the state crime lab was investigated, it was discovered that one of the personnel was actually sent home because they were drunk at the job. Now, if that's, I'm not saying, and I know it's mischievous of me, but if that's Cherie Culhane being intoxicated on her work site, that's really, really bad. Because if you've seen the documentary series How to Fix a Drug Scandal, not that I'm trying to give away spoilers here, but the lab technicians, there were two of them, well, they got into a lot of trouble, right? I don't want to give away any spoilers, but one now starts to question, was Cherie Culhane in good working condition to be in a laboratory?
Then why then weren't, if that was the situation, why not, like the case in Pennsylvania, were those cases not pulled out? And
Well, I think, one strand, you've hit the nail on the head. Here's the problem, right? If Stephen Avery's civil suit went through, and then they were going to do a corruption probe, think about this, right? If Cherie Culhane was involved in evidence tampering, right? Just say, then every criminal who's in prison who had forensic work done by Cherie Culhane will put their hand up, call their attorney and say, I want a retrial. Now, if you see How to Fix a Drug Scandal, it's the exact same thing that the MTSO in Wisconsin feared was going to happen. So if Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey were released because of nefarious activity done by the laboratory, you can betcha that every case handled by the Wisconsin State Crime Lab will be re-investigated again, and potentially prisoners walking out. So that
But can you
obviously
blame
had
him?
to put no. That's exactly what each person would do, Neverly. That's exactly what they would do. Thank you, One Strand. Obi-Wan, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a comment. Oh, it's a little discussion. It's well, it's no doubt that Cherie Culhane's deviation was to basically deprive I mean, using up the rest of the samples was to deprive the
Yes.
defense from further testing or doing any testing. But with the hood latch, I mean, do they say exactly what type of cells or anything that were there? I mean,
No,
it
they
could have
don't know.
came from like a really high quality source to gather material as like a bed. Like you could grab a ton of evidence from just a mattress. You know how much
Correct.
dead
Correct.
skin cells fall off the body, and he's been
Oh,
in that
heaps.
bed for 2 years.
Heaps. But there's one thing though, Obi-Wan. The DNA sample was pure. So therefore the source of DNA had to be pure. The good thing about the groin swab is that you know it came from Stephen Avery, and you know it contains skin cells. So the sample is pure. There's no mixture. I understand about taking it from a mattress, but there's always the possibility of picking up DNA from somebody else, right? For example, Jody or whoever slept in that bed. So that's going to give the game away. So, guys, if you're going to do planting, it has to be from a pure source. Sorry, Obi-Wan, continue.
Another one is the key. Like I feel like the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, and I think everybody pretty much agrees now that the Wisconsin State Crime Lab key is Teresa's key. And if you were to test that, it's more likely that her DNA would be on that key, which is why you don't see her DNA on the key that was found in Avery's bedroom. But there's one huge difference. There is one discrepancy. Is there's a phone call between Poggle and another gentleman, which I believe is Remaker, where they're talking about this blood being found on the key. But when it was found, when it was supposedly found, you don't hear Link or Colburn mention of seeing anything that would constitute as blood. They don't
No.
mention anything like that in their reports, which would suggest that it was later planted on this
Yes.
item.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, thank you, Obi-Wan. I mean, from the observation of the key, it was clean. There was no, and you see, here's the thing which is unbelievable. In the trials, Cherie Cohen was asked, okay, how do you do a swab? And she distinctively said, I look for the presence of blood. I look for the presence of a stain. I then do a phenolphthalein test first to prove that it's blood. If I do a phenolphthalein test and it comes up positive, I then do a DNA swab. So Cherie Cohen will be confident that the sample will contain DNA. If you have a look at the hood latch, I don't believe a phenolphthalein test was done on the hood latch. I don't believe a phenolphthalein test was done on the key and on item FL. So
No.
she actually broke her own protocol.
Now with the key, like why is Poggle stating that there, or in another gentleman stating that there's blood found on the key, but in Culhane's report, she strictly sticks to the DNA. She doesn't say
Correct.
exactly that it's blood, but she says DNA specifically.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and mentions no blood.
Yes. Culhane, that's because there was no blood. Culhane looked at the key and did not see any staining of blood. And unfortunately, think about this, guys. Because Culhane used up the entire swab, it meant that Dr. Reich couldn't do a test to see if there was blood present on the key like he did with the hood latch. So he can actually determine where the sample actually came from. Was it saliva? Was it blood? Well, because the whole hood latch, because the whole key swab had been used, he couldn't do it, right? So therefore, you have to take by face value that what Cherie Cohen is saying actually happened. That she actually swabbed the key and got a genomic profile of Stephen Avery. You don't know where that DNA came from because no one can retest it.
Couldn't she just fabricate the result?
No, you can't. And the reason why you can't fabricate it is because the sample is placed in a computer, in a machine, and the machine records all the samples that are added to it. So therefore, there's a record. So she had to have a sample that she tested. Jack 61.
Not really a question, but more of a comment directly to what One Strand was talking about, plus this other documentary, the drug scandal.
Yes.
And you have to wonder.
Yes.
You have to wonder, and I'm sure we know the answer to this, but considering that crime lab technicians testify so often, and they do, why aren't they sworn officers of the court? Right? Did you
Yes,
understand
yes.
what I'm saying? Because if they're sworn officers of the court, and they're not, they would have to. That they would really be in some deep doo-doo.
They'd
if they-
burst out in flames if they were sworn.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is just because they handle so much of this evidence. I just have to wonder why they're not. And it's not really a question; it's rhetorical. I just had to throw it out there.
Yes. Yep, very, very good point. Kelly, thank you, Jack. Kelly, do you have a comment?
I do. I actually got a question. So if Zellner got this RAV, what's the chances that there'd be any DNA left on it after all these years, that you could go in and start doing more swabs and stuff? Is there a live expectancy of like DNA, or because of the surfaces and the way it's stored, or what?
I would say now there'll be very, very little DNA left because remember the RAV4 would have been stored for many, many years now, because remember the crime happened in 2005. We're talking about 15 years. And there will be bacteria, fungi, chemicals. It's likely that everything's been broken down because you would have to somehow protect the specimens. But the state's argument will be this. Well, we've taken swabs of the RAV4. What more do you want? We preserve the swabs. which means that I have an awful suspicion that the RAV4 is gone. There is no RAV4. At best, there'll probably just be panels, and that's
So do
it.
I
Yeah.
I fear it's gone.
There's signs of them dismantling.
What's that, Obi-Wan?
There's signs that there's like supporting evidence that show that they were dismantling the RAV4.
Yes,
like they
they
were
did.
taking it apart in pieces.
Yes, they did. The FBI actually took apart the inside of the RAV. So if that's the case, I don't think they're going to reassemble the RAV. It's likely that they've kept various parts of the RAV. They're not going to keep the entire vehicle. And to me, that's a forensic gold mine. But, guys, it had to be tested in 2006, 2007. Not now, not in 2020. I think it's too late. That's just my personal opinion. Neville, do you have a comment?
I have a question, Dr. Silkman. So, in other words, if the RAV is gone, how would Zellner test, let's say, the gear shifter, the rear view mirror, and all the other like high touch places for Teresa's or somebody else's DNA?
You can't. If the RAV4's gone, that's it. It means that you have to look at the evidence that is available now. And I believe that the most powerful, and we're going to be talking about this next week, the most powerful evidence of evidence tampering is item FL. And we'll talk
Your
about that
baby.
next week. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love item FL.
I know.
BB, yes.
But just one more thing. So that would be, again, if they kept the paneling, if they kept all the things that they deemed necessary, what about the other stuff? That would be destroying of the potentially exculpatory evidence.
Well, think about this, right? They gave away a very, very powerful piece of forensic evidence, the bones, right?
Exactly.
And the bones is half the case, right? So if you think about it, guys, you've got the RAV4, which is a crime scene, and you've got the bones, which is the other part of the crime scene. If they gave away the bones, you've taken away 50% of the crime scene. If you dismantled the RAV and got rid of the RAV, you've literally sanitized the crime, right? The only thing that you're left with are the swabs. Now, if you believe of evidence tampering done by the state, do you believe the swabs? That's a problem.
No.
In other words, if you're going to test it, you would do de novo testing, something the FBI failed to do when they did the EDTA testing. So if Culhane was involved in swapping swabs, she could have simply handed over swabs to the FBI that had no EDTA on them, right? So the FBI was remiss by not doing de novo testing. Thank you, Neville. Bibi, do you have a comment?
Yes. This is just a pondering. If they swab the key, the plastic part of the key, why didn't they swab the buckle of the key where it buckles into the lanyard? That's plastic as well. There, I would think inside that would be a nice place to catch DNA. Been in her purse, in and out of her pocket, in her hand.
Correct. You're correct, Bibi. If you're going to do proper forensic analysis, you would have swabbed 5 or 6 different places on that key. You would have done 5 or 6 different swabs. And I remember when Kathleen Zellner did her test with someone holding an exemplar key that was bleeding, there was blood left on the key. You could clearly see it. And Culhane admitted that she could see no blood on that key, which is rather bizarre because if you're arguing that Stephen Avery was actively bleeding, left his blood on the ignition, then why didn't he leave it on the key? If you're saying he cleaned it, how do you explain why only his DNA was found on the key? It makes no sense whatsoever. One strand. Thank you, Bibi.
I sort of have been going over this in my head. There had to have been a reason why they didn't want those reports that Fackbender retrieved with the intimate sample, that they didn't want those submitted into evidence. And I guess my suspicion at this point is maybe they got more than just a pap smear and it was all listed on one report. And that's why they don't want to submit it, because they perfectly could have gotten a blood sample or, other DNA from her.
People have pointed out that it was maybe SD, sexually transmitted disease testing. And that's part of the whitewashing.
For me, I mean, who's to say that her blood didn't end up in there out of a blood vial as well?
Oh, I believe so, yeah.
Well, you see, that's right. Here's the whole issue. But one strand, I think you made a very important comment there. The lab technician who gave the pap smear slides to Fassbender included a report. Now, there must have been information on that report that they didn't want released, whether it was for STD testing or pregnancy testing, right? You don't know what was written on that report. So normally with a pap smear, you're looking at cells, you're looking for alterations in cells, but you don't know that while she was at the obstetrics and gynecology department, you don't know what further testing had been done. So
could have even been cancer.
You never know. Correct.
Or in addition, the inventory of what you're receiving.
Correct. And they didn't include the report. And so that's rather damning, because if you've got the report, submit it and there'll be no questions on it. Then that way they know that these slides come from Teresa Hallbach. There's no question about it. But the way they've done it now, they cause people to speculate, and I'm in total agreement with that, as long as you realize it is speculation. Colombo, do you have a comment?
I sure do. When it comes to the pap smear, I have questioned and argued. This is my point. If a woman goes to a doctor and a pap smear is required, they go and have that pap smear. Somewhere there is a piece of paper that says why the pap smear was required and the result of that pap smear. We do not get to see that.
No, we don't.
If a pap smear from Teresa was in evidence, the piece of paper from the doctor saying that this is her pap smear would absolutely say that is Teresa. So if you have a pap smear from somebody else that is deceased and you have their bones, them bones and that pap smear, along with the doctor's papers, says that is that person, even though it really isn't.
Correct. And look, I know where you're going with this, Colombo, and you're absolutely right. You can do a total body swap, and you have to also
as simple as switching swabs, eh?
Correct. And I can't argue with BB. I can't argue with Colombo. You're correct. If you don't have the piece of paper there, if you don't have the trace that you can trace where the pap smear came from all the way to the lab, a lot of questions have to be asked. You're correct. I agree with you.
Well, maybe that's a question for Travis at some point is the defense, is it required that the defense sees what they're going to agree not be submitted, or did they not see it at all?
Well, they did a gentleman's agreement, which means that none of them were going to question. They couldn't question anything. But
did they see it? Did they see that report?
Well, that would take the question out of it. So I would say no, because they're not going to question it.
Yes, they weren't going to question the validity or even how the pap smear got to the crime lab.
There was a stipulation raised in court that was agreed to by the defense.
Yes. And Ken Kratz, we also covered this in a podcast. Ken Kratz, he was very upset when the intimate sample was discussed because he thought the intimate sample was the vibrator that they found at Teresa's home, and that wasn't meant to be mentioned. But I think Ken Kratz got the intimate sample incorrect. The intimate sample they were talking about in court was not the vibrator, but the actual pap smear. Now, here's the question, right? Even if, now I know this is devious, even if Teresa Horbach's pap smear was taken to the lab, how do you know that they actually used the pap smear?
Exactly.
Right.
It's easy as
Right.
switching
exactly
swabs.
right.
Right. Exactly right. So I remember that the defense said, we want to go into the lab. We want to see these experiments being done. And Cherie Cohen argued, you can't come to the lab. Why not? Because you're a potential source of contamination. So they weren't allowed to see the experiments being done. It was done in secret.
Norm God had like 10 heart attacks about it, in the pre-trial because that's when
Correct.
Buting suggested it. Oh, we can't do that. It's just too burdensome. We can't do that. And then they go and contaminate the damn sample.
Well, she
Correct.
should have let
Cherie
them
Cohen
in.
did.
It would have looked less obvious for her to have them contaminate than herself.
Correct. Correct.
Well,
Yeah,
and
the
they
whole
had students in the lab that one day that the FL got contaminated, right?
yeah, as long as
Interns.
you as long as you believe that what she's saying is the truth.
Right.
It's very hard to believe that Cherie Cohen is working on the most important forensic piece of evidence and she's talking to students at the same time. I think she used it
I
as an
don't-
excuse.
I
She used
don't
it as an
believe it.
excuse. Yeah, because that's very, very embarrassing.
She's that good.
Yes. Neville, do you have a comment?
Well, I just wanted to state the obvious, which is the lack of transparency and the very broken up chain of custody that we see throughout this case, with the bones, with the rev, with the swabs, everything. There's just like mysterious missing and
Correct.
showing up of evidence. And
Correct.
that's rather unfortunate. And how can we not speculate? And if they were up and up, and upfront about everything,
Yes.
we wouldn't be here discussing all of this.
Well,
It's very, very frustrating.
Well, thank you, Neville. The ultimate reason that makes me very suspicious is the way the state is obfuscating and roadblocking Kathleen Zellner now. Right? As you said, if there's nothing to hide, why do you keep on hiding all these things from Kathleen Zellner and her experts? I think it's pretty obvious now because they realize the damage that her experts have caused looking at item FL. And that's now very, very embarrassing. Neville, do you have a comment?
So tell us, Dr. Silkman, why is Kathleen Zellner being stonewalled? Tell us the favorite sentence, which you're very, very right about.
Well, the state have a lot of fear. And that's because if they allow Kathleen Zellner to go in front of the judge, Kathleen Zellner and her experts will completely dismantle the state's case. And if that's the case, it's going to have disastrous consequences for the state and for a lot of the MTSO. And that potentially could bring back a civil suit even bigger. They want to block Kathleen Zellner. They don't want Kathleen Zellner to present her evidence. But then again, guys, don't forget, Kathleen Zellner may have cards close to her chest that she hasn't exposed. And they're terrified about that. And no,
You can bet on that.
I believe that. I believe she's got stuff she has not revealed.
yes, correct. And she just needs to get in front of the judge. And if that's the case, she may even have a confession, right? We never know. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Myra's asking, was the front light ever tested?
No, they don't want Kathleen Zellner anywhere near the light. Kathleen Zellner came up with the hypothesis of the RAV4 being brought from the quarry, and it hit the Pinto, and it scraped paint on the light. So all she would do is get Christopher Palanek to microtrace analysis the light, and it'll tell you the history of what happened to the light, right? And so if that destroys the state's position and case, it's going to look really bad. So they haven't even given the blinker light to Kathleen Zellner. BB.
In fact, when she asked for it, didn't they even pull it out, repackage it, and then put it back again?
Yes, I don't
Yeah,
believe
right
they
after they cleaned it.
Yeah, well, I'm
Yes.
sure polished it up. Yeah,
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And
it
we've
does
seen
look shinier, and that brown streak seems to be gone out the front of it. So
the brown streak is gone.
obviously polished it up a bit.
Yes, the brown streak is gone.
What reason
and
would they have to unpackage that and then
yeah,
repackage it in place
correct,
of giving it to her?
correct, to clean it up? And you see, it never obviously entered the state's mind that microtrace analysis was the way to go. Microtrace analysis has a look at things at the molecular level. It'll tell you things that you can't see visually, and that's
Well,
why
and
it's
haven't
so.
microscopes gotten better during those 15
Oh
years?
yes,
So
yes,
yeah.
correct, they have.
Isn't this your expertise, Dr. Silkman?
Well, I mean, I don't do forensic analysis in this particular manner, but I understand all the science behind it. And the microtrace analysis is very, very powerful. It basically means that you can use very high-powered microscopes and other instruments to have a look at what's happening at the molecular level. And so we can see that the damage that Chris Palanek did with item FL means that now, how is the state going to explain why a bullet that never touched bone, that never touched anything, has got Teresa Halbach's DNA on it, right? So now the state is it's in a corner. The state can't back out. The only way the state can back out is to say it was due to contamination. That means that item FL is totally taken out of the equation. If you take item FL out of the equation, you got nothing. The whole thing is a fantasy, right? Because you've got nothing occurring in the trailer, you've got nothing occurring in the garage, and all the forensic evidence points to the fact that Teresa Halbach was never in the trailer nor the garage. So how do you now explain item FL? And guys, that's what we'll be talking about next week, and that'll even be more controversial than the key and the hood latch. Correct. Neverly.
In regards to the key, remember in this episode when Kratz was standing in front of the jury and he
Yes.
said it's almost cartoonish to believe that someone stole Steven's toothbrush
Oh
and
my
that was
God,
written
yeah.
on the key. Remember that? And
Yes,
I'm
I
like,
do.
it's not cartoonish, you idiot. I'm like, you liar. That's exactly what happened. You know what I mean? Everything he says, and when he's appalled over some idea, I imagine
Correct.
it, that you picture it, that that's exactly what they did, because they
It's
never
just
found any
tough.
blood, and it was just Steven's DNA.
Correct.
Come on.
Correct. And now,
Do you
look,
think you're gonna find anybody else's DNA on my key?
correct. Correct. And so we got to understand, guys, it's very, very simple. Either Stephen Avery killed Teresa Halbach or he didn't. If he didn't kill Teresa Halbach, it means that everything is planted. Has to be. Everything has to be planted. So therefore, it's very. Oh, Kelly.
Oh, no. So I was just going to say exactly that. Everything is planted. But to me, and I know a lot of viewers have the same kind of idea, but then in saying that, there is so many different theories. But to me, if one thing's planted, it's all planted. But I can't see two different worlds colliding. It's either all from the law enforcement or all from the killer. the real killer.
Or
I just
potentially.
can't see. I can't see there. I just can't get my head around it being two different worlds. I just can't see it. There's too much risk involved.
There is, but there could be a possibility of a combination of both. I believe the RAV4 was planted by the law enforcement. They found Teresa Horbach. I don't know what state they found her in, but they knew she was dead. Remember, guys, if you're going to do a plant, you have to do two things. One, you have to know that the victim is either dead or has gone to Canada or left the state. Right? Right, BB?
Oh yeah, and you got to use somebody else's DNA if they're gone.
Correct. Then you got to do a body swap, right? And so you got to know that if you find the Toyota RAV4, you have to know that either the victim is dead or she's left the country. You have to. You can't do a ruse and set someone up and say, oh, I hope to God that Teresa Horbach doesn't just show up somewhere, because otherwise the whole thing is going to collapse. So either she's dead or she's left the state permanently. You can't have it's either one or the other. Columbo.
You have to understand narcissism to grasp what I'm fixing to say. But Ken Kratz absolutely stood in front of everybody and said that about the toothbrush for one specific reason. Later on, if anybody questioned it, he could go back and say that came from my suggestion. It's not what happened, it's what they took out of context of something that I have said. That's the way narcissism works. That's what he did throughout the whole trial.
Yes, everything he said had a purpose. It was goal driven.
Yes.
Every statement he made.
Correct.
Yep, I agree with that. Sammy, do you have a question?
Sherry is asking, can KZ bring up issues in an evidentiary hearing that she hasn't argued in a prior filing? And I'm referring to any issues she's keeping to herself right now. When does she have to reveal those?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the legal aspects of it. I mean, she's got her filings. Her filings are mainly about the forensic evidence, but there's more than that. She's obviously done a lot of work talking to various people as well. I don't know whether she can hold back things and then present them in front of a judge. That I don't know. I don't have a legal background.
Well, wouldn't she have this opportunity to have her same narrative as Ken Kratz did not be revealed until the end?
When she files, when KZ files for this, all of that she has filed, there is a certain amount that she can file up to. That's what they are going to review and use. The rest of it that she has is what she can use in court when she gets there.
Right,
It's
but she can.
It's a standard. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Columba, but can't she present Denny suspects?
She can present that there is Denny suspects, but she just can't go, here's 50 of them, even though I can prove there is 50. I only need to say and prove that there is, let's just say 3.
Yes.
Because that's what they're going to make their finding on, whether or not she gets the trial.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So she has got the opportunity of bringing up any suspects.
Absolutely.
And of course, Dean Strang and Jerome Buting couldn't. That was a problem. They couldn't point the finger at anybody else.
Well, that was agreed to.
Yes,
that
it was.
All agreed to. So.
Yes, it was. Correct.
That's another mistake that they made. That's part of her ineffective counsel.
Correct.
I mean, she's only listing, when it comes to ineffective counsel, part of her filings, she's only listing, let's just say it's 10 things, but
Yes.
she actually has 50. The state, when they're reviewing to determine whether she gets the evidentiary hearing or not, they don't want to review all 500 things that she's got to say. She needs to
Correct.
have 10, which is the top 10 quote.
So in
Correct.
other words, she can't try her case before they give her the permission to do it.
Correct. That's the bottom line. That's a good way to say it. Correct.
Yep.
Which they're
Obi-Wan.
stopping at any cost.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Obi-Wan.
what an evidentiary hearing. That's what an evidentiary hearing's for. But she can't. Whatever's in her motions that she had filed, that's what she can argue. She can't bring up any new. It's only what's in. I mean, if she does have evidence to suggest that there was like the Brady violations or the
Ooh, Obi-Wan, you turned into a guitar.
did I turn into a guitar?
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay. Yeah,
Brady
but
violations or the Denny, if she has evidence to suggest that the state withheld exculpatory evidence, I mean,
yes,
she definitely could argue something like that at the evidentiary.
correct. Correct. And we've actually gone through some of those things in the podcast that we've been doing. For me, the big standout one is the story that Brendan Dassey gave to Fassbender about how the RAV4 got to the pit, especially when Fassbender and Wiegert knew that it didn't come that way. It actually came from the quarry. And, that's exculpatory. I think that was referred to as a Brady violation. So Kathleen Zellner's got multiple points that she can attack. But I think what she needs to do is to dismantle the forensic evidence and actually prove that Teresa Horbach left the Avery salvage yard. And so, she's worked on the cell tower information. She's got many prongs of attack. So it'd be very interesting to see if she can actually give an evidentiary hearing to a judge. Guys, do we have any other questions? Sammy, how are we doing on the board?
So far, so good. Everybody seems to have gotten their questions out, and I've tried to make sure you've got some kind of answer.
Beautiful. Good. Panel, any other questions?
Comments.
Obi-Wan, comment.
Happy Easter, everyone. Have a safe weekend or enjoy your day.
Beautiful.
Ditto
so
that.
Colombo. Yep. Thank you.
Ditto that.
Excellent. All right, guys. Are we all good? I think we've covered quite a lot in our questions. And in today's podcast, we really... Oh, Bibi, do you have a comment?
No, not really. I just want to tell everybody to enjoy what's left of their weekend, and thanks for watching us today.
Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, we appreciate it. It is difficult times at the moment, with a pandemic and all other factors and jobs and families. It is very difficult. But we do appreciate you guys coming on and listening to us, asking your questions, and that's awesome. And please, guys, come and join us on Discord if you want to continue the discussion. And if you like what we do, guys, please give a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you like our work. And please check out the website. And on YouTube, we have a lot of material that you can follow on the case. Neverly, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, I just saw a question by Ronald Cass, and it was already answered. When is the date for the state reply? And the answer is April 17th.
Right. Yeah. Bibi.
I keep hearing a bunch of different dates. on that,
Actually, it's
so,
May 8th.
yeah,
May 8th?
I
Okay.
Yeah.
I
May
keep
8th.
hearing a
Yes.
bunch of different dates. Yeah,
Yeah, I even
Yes.
heard May
typos
29th.
or
I don't
whatnot.
know
You
where.
know,
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
we'll see. When it
typos.
happens, it happens.
Yes. And, just before we close and finish, if you really want to have Bibi see a really good documentary on Netflix, I would definitely recommend How to Fix a Drug Scandal. It's really frightening what happens when laboratory technicians are basically unsupervised and praised upon, and the potential damage that can occur if they're involved in nefarious activity. And clearly, you look at this particular case here, if it can be shown that Cherie Cohen was involved in evidence tampering or relabeling of swabs or whatever, it's going to have huge ramifications. And it could be very, very devastating. Bibi.
Sure, he just can't catch a break with Netflix, man.
Yes. Yes. But it's amazing how all these cases are from the past are now being shown on Netflix, and you can see precisely how they were handled, how, as Neville said, how the DA acted and how all law enforcement acted to try and limit the damage, etc., etc. It's very, very interesting.
Netflix keeps nailing her hide to the wall.
Yes. Yes.
Can I play her in the movie?
Of course. Oh,
Awesome.
who do you want to play?
Cherie.
Oh,
Well, she
of
did
course.
that brilliant impersonation of her already.
Of course.
She's already trained.
Yes, on Linda Kay.
You'll have to develop that drinking. Never mind. I retract that.
That's
Yes.
called motivational acting. I have to partake to get the real feel of the character.
Yes, of course, of course. Okay, guys, are there any other further comments before we close the podcast tonight? Or tonight for me, but morning for most of you guys. Any comments? Jack61.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation, Dr. Silkman. Much appreciated. All the hard work.
Pleasure.
Yes,
and
sir.
don't
Thank
forget.
you very much.
Thank you, guys. And don't forget, Neverly's been helping me put the presentations together, and she's done an excellent job. It
Thank you
takes
too,
a long
Neverly.
time. Yeah, it takes a long time to put it all together, but I think it is worth it because what we try and do is distill the important points so that anyone following the series can understand exactly how Kathleen Zellner, with her experts, are tackling the case. And, there's some pretty bad things here, as you can see yourselves. All right, guys, any final comment? All right, guys, we're all good. Well, have a happy, safe Easter and keep away from the coronavirus, and hope to catch everyone next week. Thank you, guys.
This has been a Foul Pay production.